What would make 960 people choose death over surrender? What kind of army would build a mountain just to reach you? How does it feel to watch your own end slowly approaching over the course of months? And what do you tell your children on your last night together? A.D. 73. 960 people on the summit of a mountain in the Judean desert. Below them is the largest Roman siege operation in the history of Judea. 15,000 soldiers. 8 camps encircled the mountain's foothills. There was a siege wall, a stone wall, built entirely around Masada to prevent anyone from escaping. And a ramp. On the mountain's western slope, a massive earthen ramp was being built day by day, slowly rising towards the walls with tons of earth, slowly towards the target. The people on the summit of Masada have been watching the ramp rise for months. They know what this means. When the ramp reaches the walls, and it will, the Romans will breach them. The Romans will then do to them what they did to Jerusalem 3 years ago. Jerusalem fell in AD 70. The Second Temple, the center of Jewish worship for 5 centuries, was razed to the ground. 1 million people died. The survivors were enslaved or scattered throughout the empire. The people at Masada were the last remaining ones. They were the last remaining people in the region. On the final night, their leader, a man named Eleazar ben Yair, gathered them together. He spoke at length. We know what he said because 2 women and 5 children who had survived by hiding in a water cistern told the Romans. He said, "We have chosen freedom. We will not let Rome taste the pleasure of enslaving us. We will not allow them to parade our children through the streets of the capital. We will die by our own hands as free men." The next morning, Roman soldiers scaled the walls of Masada and entered the fortress. They found 960 bodies. 2 women and 5 children emerged from a water cistern. That is the story of Masada. Now, let's discuss what happened and how. Please like the video and subscribe to support our channel. Let's get started. Masada was not originally intended to be a last-ditch stronghold. It was built as a palace. Around 37 BC, Herod the Great, who had rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem on such a grand scale as to astonish visitors, decided he needed a refuge. According to the Gospel of Matthew, he committed terrible crimes. Herod was a practical man. He was also extremely paranoid. He had enemies everywhere. The Jewish people he ruled over saw him as a Roman vassal king. The Romans he served could turn their backs on him at any moment. Cleopatra of Egypt coveted his lands. Even his own family was plotting against him. In fact, one could say he had no friends at all. And so, he built Masada. The mountain had already been made habitable by the Hasmonean kings who preceded Herod. However, what Herod built on the summit was extraordinary. Not a military fortress, it was a palace complex. The North Palace, Herod's private residence, is one of the most daring architectural works of the ancient world. Built at the northernmost point of the mountain, the palace extends down the rocky slope in 3 terraces. The top terrace housed the living quarters. The middle terrace features a circular pavilion suspended in mid-air, offering spectacular views of the Dead Sea and the Judean desert, and was intended for relaxation. Meanwhile, the lowest terrace was a bathhouse. A bathhouse on the edge of a precipice in the middle of the desert. Is this sheer luxury or a necessity? What do you think? Herod brought everything to Masada. He built sophisticated water systems, including cisterns carved into the rock and channels to collect the desert's rare rains. There was enough stored water to last for years. Storehouses brimming with food. A swimming pool, mosaic floors, walls adorned with frescoes. This is a palace with the features of a fortress. In fact, he never actually used it as a refuge. He died in his bed in 4 BC, having outlived most of his enemies. Masada remained largely deserted for the next 70 years. Then, in AD 66, the revolt broke out. In 66 AD, the Jewish population of Judea rose up against Rome. The immediate causes were clear: a corrupt Roman governor, the plundering of the temple treasury, and the massacre of Jewish civilians in Caesarea. But deeper causes had been building up for decades: Roman taxes, Rome's disregard for Jewish religious law. There was also the humiliation of a people bound by their own ancient covenant with God, being ruled by men who worshipped emperors. The revolt began with extraordinary success. The Romans were caught unprepared. The Jewish rebels seized Jerusalem. They defeated the Roman army sent to suppress them. For a brief and extraordinary moment, the Jews were free in Judea. At the very start of the revolt, a group of rebels known as the Sicarii seized Masada. They settled their families there. They used Masada as a base. When everything collapsed, when Rome sent Vespasian and then Titus with massive armies, Jerusalem fell, the temple burned, and the revolt collapsed. The Sicarii of Masada held out. By 72 CE, Masada was the last place in Judea still in Jewish hands. The Roman governor, Flavius Silva, surveyed the situation and made a decision. "This situation will not be allowed to continue," he said. Herod built Masada as a refuge. He never used it. The Sicarii seized it and used it as their stronghold. They occupied it for 7 years. Now, 960 people are watching a Roman ramp being built against their walls. What makes Masada unique in ancient history is that these people had a choice. The ramp was not yet complete. The walls had not yet been breached. There was still time. They could have surrendered. Rome did not always treat those who surrendered early cruelly. Some would have been enslaved. Some might have survived. But they chose not to surrender. That is the question. Were they heroes? Or were the leaders making a decision for people, including children, who might not all have agreed? We know that 2 women and 5 children were hiding. They survived. Did they hide because they were resisting? Or because they were afraid? Or because they wanted to live? That night, 953 people died. 7 survived. Who made the right choice? In AD 72, Flavius Silva and the 10th Legion, Legio Ex Fretensis, arrived at Masada, accompanied by other supporting units. Silva commanded a force of between 8,000 and 15,000 men. Looking up at the peaks, he made an intriguing decision. He built a city around the mountain. 8 camps, a stone wall stretching for kilometers, completely encircled the mountain's base, with towers at regular intervals. No one could get in. No one could get in or out. Those on the summit of Masada see the wall rising and realize what it means. Silva then looked towards the western side of the mountain, the only side with a natural slope, and ordered them to build a ramp. Not a small ramp. It would be an enormous engineering project. It would be made of earth, stone, and timber, stretching from the mountain's base up to the ramparts at the summit. Every day, thousands of laborers, most of whom were Jewish prisoners, carried materials up to the summit. The defenders at the summit realized this immediately. The villagers of Masada could have thrown stones at the captive laborers. They could have shot arrows. But the laborers were Jewish. They were their own kind. The Romans had anticipated this. The ramp was rising every month, every day, every hour. Life continued at the summit. The Sicarii had seized Herod's granaries, which had stood empty in the desert for 70 years. Herod's cisterns were also in their possession. They had livestock. When they took Masada 6 years earlier, the children were with them. Those children had grown up to become young men in a besieged environment where survival was their only option. We do not know exactly what life was like on the summit of Masada during the siege. However, archaeology has helped to fill in these gaps. These coins date from the period of the revolt. Pottery made during the siege. Personal items such as sandals, combs, and fabrics show how daily life continued under these extraordinary circumstances. People cooking, children playing. The Sabbath is being observed. Life goes on, but a military ramp is rising towards them. This was completed in spring AD 73. Silva brought a siege tower to the site. This wheeled wooden tower was clad in iron plates for protection and topped with a battering ram. The ram struck the wall and began to bring it down. The defenders built an inner wall of timber and earth. This wall was softer and more flexible, making it harder to demolish with the battering ram. Silva ordered them to set the planks alight. Initially, the wind had been blowing towards the Romans, but it changed direction. The fire turns back. For a time, the Romans believe they are fighting the mountain itself. Then the wind blows in yet another direction. The inner wall is ablaze. That night, the final night, Eleazar ben Yair speaks. Josephus recounts this speech to us as relayed by the two surviving women. It is a magnificent defense of death over slavery, drawing upon Stoic philosophy, Jewish theology, and the unique fate facing the Romans. He speaks of the soul's eternal life. He talks about the shame of slavery. He talks about the suffering their children would endure as Roman slaves. He also mentions the fact that God had already judged them by allowing Rome to go so far. Eleazar ben Yair speaks at length. Not everyone is convinced at first. He speaks again. Then, according to the survivors' accounts, each man killed his own family. After that, the men drew names from a sack. 10 men are chosen to kill the rest. Once there are only 10 men left, one of them is chosen to kill the other 9. The last man sets fire to the palace and kills himself with his sword. The next morning, when the Romans arrived, they found 960 bodies arranged in an orderly fashion. They were arranged in an orderly fashion, not scattered, in sequence. The storerooms were still full. This was to prove to Rome that they had not died of starvation. This was a deliberate decision. Masada is often considered the greatest act of Jewish heroism in history. However, it has also been described as a mass suicide, with the leader imposing his theology on people who may not have agreed with it. The Romans won. They took the mountain. Instead of finding 960 slaves, they found 960 bodies. So who actually won at Masada? The Romans got the mountain. The Jews got the story. 2,000 years later, the story is still shaping a nation. So which matters more? Masada was mostly forgotten for around 2,000 years. The Romans left the area. On top of the hill, Byzantine Christians built a small monastery. The monks knew what had happened there. But over time, people forgot the story. The desert reclaimed the mountain. In 1838, an American Bible scholar named Edward Robinson examined a mountain above the Dead Sea and claimed that it was the place Josephus had written about. However, for 100 years, no one excavated the site. In 1963, Yigael Yadin, an Israeli archaeologist, oversaw the first major excavation at Masada. What they found was amazing. Herod's palace is still mostly standing. The storerooms still contain food from 2,000 years ago. The synagogue is one of the oldest ever discovered. There are baths for rituals. There are mosaic floors and things that belong to you, combs and sandals, things for your face. Letters in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, bearing the voices of those who lived and died here. Everyone was interested in one particular find, a number of pieces of pottery, each with a name written on it. 11 pieces. One of them was labeled, "I am Yair." Yadin thought these were parts of a lottery, but he couldn't prove it. On the last night, a lottery was held to decide who would kill whom. He couldn't prove it, but he believed it was true. This is the true story of Masada, not death, life before death. These people were surrounded by the largest military force in Judea. Every day, they saw a ramp being built towards them, yet they continued to pray, teach their children, and be themselves. Since 1965, the Israel Defense Forces have held a ceremony at Masada. New recruits climb the mountain at night after completing their basic training and swear an oath of loyalty at sunrise. The oath ends with 3 words: Masada will never fall again. This is not just a military slogan. It is a statement about identity. It is a reminder that the story of the 960 people who chose death over losing their identities is still relevant. It is a statement that still affects how people see themselves. The Romans are no longer here. The 10th Legion is no longer here. Flavius Silva is no longer here. The ramp is still there. The synagogue built by the defenders remains on its mountaintop in the desert, overlooking the Dead Sea. It still glances towards Jerusalem. It still points to a temple that no longer exists. If you like the video, please subscribe, like, and share it with your friends. See you soon.